the perception and how the public perceive what they are and aren't meant to do. And I don't think there's been clarity to correct that as we've gone along, which has ended up with what you're seeing now, where people are going out and behaving normally.
So you think that the public, the general public, have been ignoring the government's messaging?
I don't think at the beginning, no. I think over the last 4 or 5 days, there has been very clear. You only need to go out to see it. More vehicular use, more people on the footways, and this is like a snowball effect, because when people see that, then they start copying that, and that's what you're seeing.
Okay, and from 2 hours' time or thereabouts, we're expecting the Prime Minister to come out and launch this new "Stay Alert" slogan. Do you think that's going to go any way to helping the police's plight in dealing with all of this?
I think it's going to be very difficult from what I've seen, and if it's correct what I've seen, it doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense, because there are caveats where possible and words like that that just make it impossible, because you're going to have too many people being allowed to move around in one area. I'd have to see the clarity on it, and I hope there will be very clear clarity later as to who can and who can't move around in this way.
I mean, what does "Stay Alert" mean to you? I know the government wants it to mean those that can't work from home and can go to work and do so safely should. But is that your understanding of what it means?
No, not really. My understanding of "Stay Alert" is to be awake and be conscious of what you're doing. Um, this is a virus that we can't see and know nothing about in terms of where it is. So this is very difficult to start using words that really don't make sense in terms of what you're asking the public to do. And if the public don't understand that, then we're going to have a problem.
I mean, there has been this kind of debate throughout, certainly the last few weeks, as you describe, as that messaging might have been watered down a little bit, about whether or not we really need the government to be prescriptive, whether or not we're adult and grown up enough to understand the nuances, to understand, look, we need to stop the spread of this virus, we need to protect the NHS, but if we go to the park and sunbathe for 20 minutes and we aren't, closer than 2 metres from anyone, what's the danger to all of that?
Yeah, I think that's where the mixed messaging has been. You've had a lot of medical experts propping themselves up with views on how we should and shouldn't behave, and I think it's made it quite difficult for the public in general to understand what is actually required of them. It's very clear for us as police, if we're told to do something, we go out and do it, but it has to be concise, it has to be fair, and it has to be for everyone.
And I presume if the public are confused about what this message means, then many police officers might be confused as well. So how easy will it be to police it?
Well, it won't be easy. And, a bit of a hypothesis in the conversation, because I don't really know exactly what the PM is going to come out with later, but I'm led to believe, and if it's correct, then it's going to be very, very difficult, because you had Grant Shapps yesterday saying only 10% of people could use the trains. Well, how does that work if more people are going out? I don't understand how we're going to enforce that at all.
And of course, we are in unprecedented times. It's very difficult for the government to come up with a strategy that protects society, but also makes policing easy. Do you accept there are no easy answers to all of this?
Oh, totally. This is completely new. Every day of how we're living this now is new to my colleagues. They are doing their utmost to, be respective of what's going on, to try and police with consent and get the public to understand what they're doing. Overall, they've done, I think, an incredible job with what's been put in front of them. But I don't want this last phase to become a melee where they don't understand, we don't understand, and everyone just then starts doing what they want. That's not going to work, and the deaths will go back up.
OK, really good to get your thoughts. Ken Marsh, the Chief of the Metropolitan Police Federation, thank you very much indeed. Let's take a look now at some of today's other stories. And President Trump has hit back at Barack Obama after the former president described Mr. Trump's handling of the coronavirus pandemic as an absolute chaotic disaster. Well, in a tweet, Mr. Trump responded saying, "We're getting great marks for the handling of the coronavirus pandemic, especially the very early ban of people from China, the infectious source entering the USA. Compare that to the Obama Sleepy Joe disaster known as H1N1 swine flu. Poor marks, bad polls, didn't have a clue." Well, he was responding to details of a conference call. Being tribal, being divided, and seeing others as an enemy, that has become a stronger impulse in American life. It's been an absolute chaotic disaster when that mindset of what's in it for me and to heck with everybody else, when that mindset is operationalised in our government. Well, here the government's admitted sending about 50,000 coronavirus tests to the United States for processing after operational issues in UK labs. The Department of Health said the swabs were sent abroad last week due to teething problems. The results will be validated in the UK and sent to patients as soon as possible. Dr. Anthony Fauci, the head of the US National Institute of Infectious Diseases, has entered what he's calling a modified quarantine after coming into contact with a White House staffer who tested positive for coronavirus. Dr. Fauci is a key member of the White House COVID task force and regularly appears at press conferences alongside the president. And South Korea is reviewing its easing of restrictions after 40 new cases of COVID-19 were linked to people going to nightclubs last weekend. More than 2,000 bars and clubs have now been shut in the capital, Seoul. 17 new cases were linked to one 29-year-old who visited 3 clubs last Saturday before testing positive on Tuesday. Now, men and women in Uganda are being beaten for being gay, claim human rights groups. Uganda has some of the world's most prohibitive laws governing homosexuality, a situation made worse amid the coronavirus lockdown. Authorities there are using it as a cover for their violence. Sky News has obtained footage filmed at a shelter near Kampala. This report comes from our Africa correspondent, John Sparks.
There are 23 men and women cowering on the forecourt of a shelter in Uganda. They're young and homeless, and some are sick.
No. Stupid.
But they are treated with brutality by the authorities because, say human rights groups, they're gay. These pictures, obtained by Sky News, show the mayor of a municipality near the capital, Kampala, beating shelter residents with a 4-foot cane. And he and his officials taunt and interrogate those trembling before them. We've obscured the identity of the shelter's occupants, something the authorities have been determined to reveal. However, the official explanation for this raid doesn't mention homosexuality. Instead, the shelter manager and residents are accused of spreading the coronavirus. And the police bind their hands and tie them together with rope and force march them to the municipal police station. 19 people from the shelter were charged by police and imprisoned, and they've been cut off from the outside world. Lawyers haven't been permitted a single visit in the past 5 weeks. Patricia Camira will lead their defense.
Like I said, it was a trumped-up charge, doing an act that is likely to spread infection of disease. These are people who were found in a shelter, in a home, a place that they take as home. For me, I still believe that there was no violation at all of any of the rules.
Uganda's longtime leader, Yoweri Museveni, casts himself as a man's man, doing press-ups in the presidential office during the country's lockdown. And he's got no time for sexual equality. Same-sex relationships are strictly illegal. Still, the United Nations Special Rapporteur told me Museveni's administration should release the 19 defendants.
I think it would be important that there is an immediate consideration of the release of these persons and certainly their access to lawyers.
In response, Kampala's police spokesman told us the incident wasn't a raid, it was a community initiative targeting improper social distancing. The mayor declined to give us a comment. Lawyers for the defendants continue to seek their release. John Sparks, Sky News.
We're watching Sky News coming up in just a moment as some businesses are encouraged to return to work if safe to do so. Where does that leave firms who rely on international travel? Now, the gradual easing of lockdown restrictions will allow some businesses to resume with safety precautions in place. However, many rely on international travel, but with new quarantine measures in place, just how can those firms operate effectively? Well, to discuss this, we've got Clive Ratton, the Chief Executive of the Business Travel Association. He joins us this evening from Aylesbury. Very warm welcome to the programme. Been an incredibly difficult time for you guys, I'm sure. What are you hoping to hear this evening?
Well, good afternoon, Isabel. Well, we know that the government are likely to announce this 14-day quarantine for passengers coming back into the United Kingdom, and clearly that has very serious consequences for us, the business travel industry and the whole business travel ecosystem that includes airlines, hotels, car companies, and the whole thing. But clearly, if that's what the science is suggesting and that's what's happening, we're going to have to deal with it.
And what do you think that's going to mean, dealing with it? Can you expect to see a lot of companies going to the wall, having to move on or, into liquidation?
I mean, what we need with this is for the government to come out with a further extending of the package of support for the industry. That's absolutely critical. The furlough scheme is key to this, and we need to see that extended probably towards the end of the year in some format. We need this scheme, quarantine scheme, to be really regularly reviewed. I mean, we would really like to see it done on a weekly basis. So as soon as it's safe to do so, and clearly the most important thing here is people's well-being and safety. But, you know, business travel industry will reignite the industry and our whole economy. So we need to make sure that we've got the guidelines to work in that we can, you know, start people travelling again and get the economy moving once more.
Although all of this assumes that the airline industry will survive this, there have been seriously grave concerns about whether or not that will happen. And of course, what will that mean for the business travel sector if we see successive airlines going to the wall because they're not getting those government bailouts?
It's really a tough place out there for the whole industry right now. But this country absolutely needs a viable and competitive airline industry. You know, it's not just about travelling away on holiday, which is great, of course. It is about going out and taking British produce. It's about, you know, our experience going overseas. We need that airline industry to be able to expand our country, to get the economy growing again. So it's just critical that the aviation industry remains in some format and builds again and gets stronger.
Although the reality is we're likely to see air travel at least becoming more expensive, and that might be passed on to businesses, indeed consumers. Can we expect, do you think, long-term changes and challenges in terms of cost and expense to everybody, right down to the consumer?
Yeah, well, the industry has been evolving massively over the years and has adapted before. And, you know, in the short term, I don't think, you know, the airlines will be looking for massive price hikes. Very much depends on the rules around social distancing and how they can operate. But we're really campaigning to keep the prices within sensible realms to get people back travelling again. But as we move forward, you know, it's so difficult. There's so many unknowns right now that where this is all going to end and where it's going to head. But, you know, that's why it's critical to have a competitive airline industry, is to make sure the price to the end consumer, you know, remains sensible.
It is really difficult and really unpredictable times, as you say. What have you made of the government's bailout schemes thus far, the furloughing and the loans, the business loans that they've made? You know, obviously those can't continue forever. It will bankrupt the country. There has to be a point at which the government says, we can't do this anymore. When do you think that is a feasible time for the government to take those decisions?
Yes, it's incredibly difficult for them to ascertain when it's the right time to move it away. I can only speak from my industry, and, you know, we're really a critical part of the supply chain and business travel, that we understand that it can't go on forever. But specific industries such as the travel industry, the aviation industry, needs that support because it's not going to get up and running particularly quickly. So, you know, we've already been engaging with government, explaining the position, and I think, you know, that needs to continue. And really, you know, the furloughing and the business loan schemes needs to be broken down to those industries that will need it for longer than the period that is already prescribed.
There will, of course, be cheerleaders, potentially controversially, but there will, of course, be cheerleaders looking on from the sidelines, hoping that the aviation industry never really gets back on its feet, that we don't go back to travelling for business in the way that we used to because of the environmental consequences. What would you say to those?
Well, the aviation industry has been evolving massively you know, up until this point. We know there's change coming down the tubes around the way that people are going to travel and what the travel needs are, and we will adapt to that. I don't think there's any getting away that, you know, aviation is really still a critical part of the infrastructure of this country, as is business travel, and as a result, there will still be some flying. But I think, you know, behaviours will change. This has just been a faster step of a journey we were taking in the industry to change. But I think aviation is there to stay, and it's, again, a critical part. We're an island nation to keep our economy flowing.
OK, Clive Ratton, really good to talk to you, CEO of the Business Travel Association. Thank you. Well, the weather's been a little bit disappointing today. Let's find out what it's going to get up to in the next few days. Well, it's going to be mostly dry and sunny tomorrow, but the northerly wind means it will be cold. Before then, most places will have a dry evening, but there'll be a few showers near southern and northeastern coasts, wintry in the north. Cloud and any showers in the south will clear overnight, leaving most places dry under starry skies, but there'll be showers near northern and eastern coasts. It will be cold with stiff wind in the south and east, and the calmer north and west will turn frosty in places. On to tomorrow, and Monday morning will be mostly dry and sunny, but northern and eastern Britain will see a few showers near the coasts. It will be chilly with a bitterly cold wind in the south and east. Well, showers will take over more of northern Scotland during the afternoon, with sleet and snow likely on the hills. There'll be little change elsewhere. Most places will be sunny into the evening, and then Tuesday will bring sunny spells and a scattering of showers, with the showers mainly over northern and central parts, and it will be a little bit milder. While you're watching Sky News, do stay with us, because at 6 o'clock we will be live in Downing Street with Mark Austin as we have all the build-up to Boris Johnson's coronavirus statement to the nation at 7 o'clock. Do stay with us.
I'm Mark Austin. You're watching Sky News at 6, live from Downing Street. The Prime Minister prepares to reveal the government's next move in the attempt to control the coronavirus. The changing advice to stay alert, not just stay at home, puts England on a different track to the rest of the UK.
It would be catastrophic for me to drop the stay-at-home message, which is why I am not prepared to do it.
no bounce back for many businesses. We'll hear what they want to hear from Boris Johnson. His statement from Downing Street will be broadcast in an hour. You can see it here on Sky News. Good evening and welcome to Downing Street, where just short of 7 weeks ago, Boris Johnson announced the UK was going into lockdown. Since then, he has contracted and recovered from coronavirus, but many thousands of people have died. The economy has virtually ground to a halt. Tonight, in an hour's time, the Prime Minister reveals his plans for the next stage of the lockdown, and he's already confirmed the government's advice will be changing. His official Twitter account revealed a new slogan, "Stay alert," and says people should now only stay home as much as possible. Scotland's First Minister said the new advice could be catastrophic. We will, of course, have the Prime Minister's speech in full, but first this evening, our political correspondent, Joe Pike, has this report.
An updated strategy and an updated slogan. Stay alert, control the virus, save lives. But after some were left confused, the PM tweeted this message this afternoon. We can help control the virus if we all stay alert, so stay at home as much as possible. Work from home if you can, limit your contact with other people, keep your distance if you go out, and wash your hands regularly. But not everyone is convinced.
I don't know what stay alert means. Presumably we all live our lives in normal times, staying alert to danger. But if I say to you, my message now is stay alert, and you say to me, but does that mean I stay at home or not? I can't give you a straight answer to that. And therefore, I am feeling in my duty to be clear in terms of what I'm asking you to do.
Northern Ireland's Arlene Foster is also sticking with the stay-at-home message, as is the First Minister of Wales.
Being alert is important, but staying at home has not gone away. If you're not out of your house for an essential purpose, and that does include exercise, and it can include shopping, and it must include going to work for people who can safely do so, staying at home remains the best way that you can protect yourself and others.
At 7 p.m, we expect Boris Johnson to announce that in England, people who cannot work from home will be encouraged to return to their workplaces while following social distancing rules. Garden centres will be allowed to reopen from Wednesday. The limit of one form of exercise a day will be relaxed. The public will be advised, but not forced, to wear face coverings in shops and on public transport. And there could be tougher fines for those who break the rules. The Prime Minister is also due to announce a virus threat level system, similar to that used to assess terror threats.
At the moment, we believe the country is at 4 on a scale of 5, with 5 being the most concerning. And our aspiration is to bring that down as swiftly as we can to 3. And at each stage, at each of those milestones, we'll be in a position to open up and restart more aspects of the economy and of our lives.
There have been Cabinet and Cobra meetings here today to sign off the new strategy and also get Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland on board. The message from the government to all of us has been quite simple up to this point. Now it gets complicated. And early signs suggest the attempt at unity across the UK is already falling apart. Joe Pike, Sky News, Westminster.
And our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, is with me now. So much trailed this. What can we expect?
So days of hype about tonight's speech, and there's no doubting that this is a significant moment, but there is a danger that expectations have simply been raised too high. We've got a fair idea, as Joe Pike was saying in his film, of what's coming up in tonight's address by the Prime Minister. The headline change likely to be that ditching of the slogan "Stay at home," replacing it with a slogan "Stay alert." Now, we've already heard from Nicola Sturgeon, Mark Drakeford, Arlene Foster, that the different nations of the United Kingdom won't be following suit. I understand Tory MPs are also worried at the confusion that it causes and the fact that it ditches the stay at home to protect the NHS part of the message. Now, when they complained, they were told that the address even earlier today was still a work in progress, suggesting that things have been evolving even today. I understand that part of it was recorded yesterday and part of it today, so what you'll see at 7 o'clock is in fact pre-recorded. Another central part, according to Robert Jenrick on Sophie Ridge's programme this morning, of tonight's address will be telling those who can work but can't do so from home, that they really should now return to the workplace, to factories, manufacturing and construction. And adding that you shouldn't use public transport if you can possibly avoid it. Now, given that this is likely to be such a central part of tonight's address, it is interesting to note that that's not actually a change. That has been the guidance all the way along. Why is he emphasising it? Well, because underlying a lot of this has been the success of the government's stay-at-home slogan. They now need to convince people that things are changing without actually seeing people rush out. But the mixed messages can be confusing. That's why it's going to be fascinating to see the reception to tonight's address.
Yeah, so the Cabinet meeting at Cobra, as you say, today, will anything have changed during that? Are you saying things may have changed during the Cabinet this morning in the Cobra meeting?
Well, it does seem as if some of it was recorded yesterday, some of it today, so there has been an evolution in the Prime Minister's message. I think there has been some nervousness that the stay alert message might be a bit too stark, certainly from Boris Johnson's MPs, forcing perhaps a little bit of a rethink. Boris Johnson personally is said to be incredibly cautious about lifting the lockdown, despite enormous pressure both from his MPs and members of his cabinet. He himself, having suffered from coronavirus, doesn't want to see a second spike. But the question tonight is twofold. Does he present anything like a detailed roadmap across the next from June onwards? And does he start to answer any of the really difficult questions, the battles between employers and employees, for instance, or how you might get schools back in this difficult environment in any specificity, or whether he just leaves that to the future?
Okay, and just finally and briefly, could we be looking at different parts of the United Kingdom moving at different speeds on this?
Yes, and this is where the question of schools is most interesting. In Wales, Mark Drakeford, the First Minister, has said there is no world in which the schools in Wales will be going back to work, or will be going back on June the 1st. Something similar in Scotland, although they're very cautious, although nothing quite as definitive as that. But Boris Johnson, if you believe the papers just a week ago, is looking at perhaps opening primary schools maybe at the start of June. If different parts of the United Kingdom are doing different things on schools, it'll put the existing differences, which at the moment are quite minor but very much there, into a whole new context.
Okay, Sam, thanks very much indeed. Stay with us. And the new advice promoted by the Prime Minister today told people to work from home if you can. The question tonight will be whether he goes further than he has previously before to encourage those who can't work from home to return to their workplaces. Sky's business correspondent Paul Kelso reports.
The only person jumping at this trampoline centre in Tamworth is the owner's daughter. Holly has a space designed for hundreds to herself, but business will not be bouncing back quickly here. The health emergency has created an economic crisis, and leisure and hospitality may be the last to recover. Lockdown has already cost £400,000 in lost revenue, and despite furloughing staff and a £200,000 emergency loan, he says his business may not survive.
It's had a devastating effect on the business. It will obviously depend how long the period of closure is. None of us know that yet, but the indications are it may well be into the autumn before we're able to properly reopen. If we're completely closed until October, the loan we've taken out probably wouldn't be sufficient without additional support.
Planters Garden Centre nearby has managed to keep going thanks to a call and collect service, and can look forward to reopening everything except its restaurant this week. Customers will be limited to 60 at a time. A one-way system has been laid out and screens erected at all the tills. It won't be perfect, but it will help rescue a disastrous year so far.
We should be very relieved, even if we see an upturn in trade over the next few weeks and months. The chances are we'll still make a loss for the whole year. Our restaurant, which is the biggest single profitable centre within the business, obviously is going to remain closed for longer. So that has a big impact.
Less certain are the prospects for other retailers that sustain millions of jobs, considered non-essential and closed for now. And whenever workers are cleared to return in numbers, it will pose a challenge for public transport.
Social distancing means that commuter services like this one will only be able to run at a fraction of their normal capacity, which is why commuters may be advised to wear masks or face coverings.
Before many will be able to go back to work, they'll need their children to be able to go back to school.
the teachers want to be back in school teaching. I mean, that's what they want to do, and the school leaders that I work with want to open their schools, but only when they know it's safe, and the well-being of staff and students has to be paramount, as well as the sort of the wider community as well, where these students go on to.
The impact of lockdown on children is hard to quantify, but for education, like the wider economy, recovery is likely to come one small step at a time. Paul Kelso, Sky News in Tamworth.
Well, the disagreement over the handling of the lockdown isn't limited to the nations here in the UK. President Trump has hit back at his predecessor, Barack Obama, over his criticism of his handling of the coronavirus epidemic in America. Barack Obama said it had been an absolute chaotic disaster, which prompted the president to tweet that he was getting great marks. From America, Sky's Cordelia Lynch has this report.
After largely avoiding the phrase since leaving the White House, Barack Obama is now firmly in it. In a leaked call with thousands of alumni of his administration, the former president had this frank assessment. What we're fighting against is these long-term trends in which being selfish, being tribal, being divided and seeing others as an enemy, that has become a stronger impulse in American life, he said. He took specific aim at the Trump administration's approach to COVID-19. It's part of the reason why the response to this global crisis has been so anemic and spotty, he explained. It would have been bad even with the best of governments. It has been an absolute chaotic disaster when that mindset of what's in it for me and to heck with everybody else, when that mindset is operationalized in our government. But Mr. Trump remains adamant he has outperformed others, especially the man Barack Obama was meant to be promoting on that call. He tweeted, "We are getting great marks for the handling of the coronavirus pandemic, especially the very early ban of people from China, the infectious source entering the USA. Compare that to the Obama Sleepy Joe disaster known as H1N1 swine flu. Poor marks, bad polls, didn't have a clue." His team were a little more subtle in their responses.
With all due respect to the former president, and I really don't want to get into a political back and forth here, I don't know what he's talking about.
But on Fox News, the US Treasury Secretary did know the figures are not looking good.
The reported numbers are probably going to get worse before they get better, but that's why we're focused on rebuilding this economy. We'll have a better third quarter, we'll have a better fourth quarter, and next year is going to be a great year.
But Donald Trump knows he needs a bounce to help him into another year. He will likely view criticism from his predecessor as a help, not a hindrance. Cordelia Lynch, Sky News, Washington.
Well, the UK has been in lockdown now for more than, or for almost 2 months, meaning most people haven't seen their family members or had a normal routine for a long time. That, of course, can have a long-term impact on people's mental health. Joining me now from North London is Professor Susan Mickey, a professor of health psychology and a director of the Centre for Behaviour Change at UCL. Thanks for joining us. Let's just start with the slogans. Stay at home was pretty clear. Stay alert may not be so clear for some people. How do you think people will react to that?
Well, the public have been asking over the last few weeks for really clear and consistent messaging about what they should be doing and who should be doing exactly what. And you're right that the change of slogan signals two things. By dropping stay at home, people may read into that there's maybe not such a necessity to stay at home any longer. And substituting it with stay alert is quite confusing because it's not behaviourally specific. It doesn't suggest to people what they should be doing. Alert means, I looked it up in the dictionary, means vigilant. But vigilant about what? And then if you do find that you're vigilant about something, what are you meant to do about it? So I think there's a real problem about the vagueness and ambiguity. My other concern about the ambiguity is that if people interpret this in different ways, then there may begin to be divisions between people who interpret it one way and others who interpret it another way. And that could be quite undermining of the collective solidarity that's been so important in keeping adherence to the guidance going so far.
But it is difficult, isn't it, for the government? Because from now on, the message has to be more nuanced, because they're asking, or will be asking, different people to do different things at different times.
Absolutely. It is going to be more challenging because different sectors of the society will be being asked to do different things. But that doesn't mean that you can't still use very clear, consistent and precise wording in your communications. These times are very uncertain, they're very anxiety provoking. And what's absolutely essential in uncertain and anxiety provoking times is to ensure that communications are three things: clear, consistent and precise, even if it means that this group is allowed to go back to work and this group must stay at home. As long as you are clear and also you give an explanation so that everybody understands why the advice is being given in the way it's being given.
But it has to be said, there appears, according to the polls at least, broad support for the restrictions, for the lockdown. Do you think that will continue?
The polls show that more than half the population think the lockdown is about right. Another 25% think the lockdown should be more restrictive. So I think it's only about 10% of the population who have been raring at the bit to get back and to get out and about again. And so I think it's going to be probably quite polarised. And I think the confusion is not going to help, because what we do want is to encourage those people who haven't left the house at all, even though they are under 70, have no underlying conditions, to get them used to going out of the house and finding out that it's maybe not the totally unsafe place that it feels from the point of view of their own house. So wanting that to happen on the one hand, whilst also restricting everybody else to staying at home to suppress the pandemic, which is absolutely needed. We haven't met the 5 criteria that Chris Whitty set out. The R value is almost 1. We need to keep going with these restrictions. And so in order to do that, even though we may be asking different people to do different things, it needs to be done very, very clearly.
So given all that, and there is this factor of the infection rate approaching 1, how difficult then will it be, in your view, to persuade people that it's safe to go back to work?
What's going to be absolutely key is the objective reality on the ground at work, and for people to know that there are good health and safety inspectors who can give assurance that it will be possible to keep the 2 meters distance, that there will be access to hot water and soap or hand sanitizer, so that they can carry on preventing the transmission of the virus. A lot of people are very worried, not only about themselves, but also coming back from working situations to their households where there may be vulnerable people there. And so I think the guarantee of safe working conditions has got to be the basis for people feeling reassured. And I think a partnership, going forward, I think we need much more meaningful community engagement and partnership working. So in this case, the obvious partners are the trade unions and the TUC, who've got a record of ensuring that workplaces are meeting certain safety guidelines.
OK, and we'll be talking to the unions in a little while. OK, Susan Mickey, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, of course, reaction to the Prime Minister's statement is likely to dominate tomorrow's papers. We'll be taking a first look at those front pages in our press preview tonight at 10:30 with City AM's comment editor Rachel Cunliffe and the columnist for Unheard, Paul Embry. Right, coming up on Sky News, live from Downing Street, ahead of the Prime Minister's statement, we will be speaking to one of Britain's highest profile businessmen about the impact of the lockdown and what changes he's hoping for.
I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
The UK has been in lockdown for more than 6 weeks. Our lives have been impacted like never before.
We'll want, if we possibly can, to get going with some of these measures on Monday.
So how will the Prime Minister map our exit from lockdown? The Prime Minister's statement tonight at 7 p.m. on Sky News. Welcome back, and this is the scene across London as we speak, and we wait for the Prime Minister, who in something like 35 minutes' time will be addressing the nation on the latest phase to this lockdown, and we will of course bring you that speech in full at 7 o'clock. Now, the lockdown has cut deep into the global economy, and businesses shut their doors and borders have closed. The Bank of England says the UK's GDP could fall 14% this year, its worst annual slump for more than 300 years. Joining me now is the founder of Phone For You, business leader and philanthropist John Caldwell. Thanks very much for joining us. First of all, what would you like to hear from Boris Johnson this evening?
Well, I think that a really rapid release releasing of restrictions is very important, but of course, in line with new cases. So it's a very, very difficult job the government have got to do. And somebody said to me, am I in favour of lives or the economy? But that is not the equation at all. It's lives or lives, because the damage that's being done to the economy will have a damaging effect on people's lives and their lifespan. There's going to be a lot of mental health issues, a huge amount of problems as a consequence of the current lockdown, which I'm forecasting will probably give rise to 2 million extra unemployed. I've been forecasting 15 to 20% reduction in GDP now for 2 months ever since the start of this crisis. Everybody else has been forecasting around about 5%. The Bank of England have now caught up to 14%, but I don't think that's necessarily the severity. I think it could get worse. So I think the government really do have to start and unlock the economy, unlock people's lives, not to risk lives, although of course there'll be a risk to lives, but we need to monitor that extremely closely whilst trying to get Britain back to work and get people out of this lockdown situation in their homes and able to live somewhat more of a normal life.
And do you think that some businesses could perhaps have opened before now?
Oh, do you know, I wouldn't really like to say that, because there has been, I would have handled the crisis totally differently, to be honest. I would have tried to protect all the old and all the infirm and kept Britain running. But I do realise, of course, the difficulty of that challenge, especially when other countries had set a precedent by just locking down the countries. So I don't know, given the situation we're in, and we have been in for the last few weeks, would I have released things a little bit quicker? Maybe on a geographic basis, which is something that I was recommending some time ago, that we choose some of the geographic areas where the crisis is not so bad, lift the boundaries there a bit, just release some of the restrictions there and monitor what happens. But I think whatever we do has to be sensitive, but it has to be as rapid as possible, because otherwise we're going to cost lives further down the line as a result of the economic crisis that we're putting families in.
Yeah, and how prepared do you think that businesses are to open up safely, and how prepared do you think workers are to go back?
Well, you know, I think on the positive side, I think there's probably quite a lot of people who have enjoyed this holiday in the sun. There'll be a lot of people that haven't. You know, my heart goes out to people that are trapped in little apartments with children who are bored stiff. It's been a terrible situation for some, but not so bad for others. But whatever the situation, people do have to get back to work. They do have to try and recover the UK economy, and that is going to be difficult, because as we know, we're going to have restrictions such as restaurants initially probably only being able to use outside terraces. Even when we go indoors, it might be restricted to a 2-metre distance between tables. So it's going to be very, very difficult for a lot of businesses to resume business and be profitable. So they may carry on losing money even when they get back open again, because the reduction in turnover, the reduction in efficiency is so severe that it gives them major difficulties. And the airlines, well, I hate to think what is going to happen to the aerospace industry, because the airlines are completely decimated. They've got such major overheads, fixed overheads and variable overheads. And I don't know how they survive this. There's going to be, without doubt, there's going to be bankruptcies within the airline industry, and and they are going to have a real terrible job recovering from it.
Yeah, difficult times ahead. John Caldwell, thanks very much for joining us this evening.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Coming up on Sky News Live from Downing Street, just half an hour until we hear from the Prime Minister. I'll be talking to a panel of experts about what the potential impact of the revised coronavirus rules could be. Welcome back. This is Sky News live from Downing Street as we await Boris Johnson's statement on the future of the lockdown, the next phase of the lockdown. The Prime Minister is due to set out new measures for gradually easing the restrictions, including a new slogan to stay alert. But Boris Johnson has been criticised by the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, for sending out mixed messages on social distancing. And President Trump has hit back at Barack Obama after he described his handling of the coronavirus pandemic as a chaotic disaster. And this is the scene over London as we await Boris Johnson, who will, 7 weeks ago, he spoke to the nation about going into the lockdown, and now he will be speaking to us about how that is going to be eased, how some of the restrictions may be eased in the coming weeks. And we expect that in 25 minutes at 7 o'clock. Now, let's get some thoughts from my panel of experts tonight. Simon Clark, a microbiologist at the University of Reading, Steve Turner, who is Unite Assistant General Secretary, Edwin Morgan, who is Director of Policy at the Institute of Directors, and Jackie Semple, Chair of the Emergency Planning Society. All join me this evening. Thanks very much. Simon, let's just start with you, start with the science, follow the science, as they say. What will scientists be saying to Boris Johnson about what he can and can't do you think?
I think they'll be telling him to go very, very slowly. I'm almost certain of that, particularly in light of the fact that we've had restrictions lifted in Germany. And we see from the Robert Koch Institute in Germany, that the body that oversees these things, that their R number has gone up above 1.1. So anything that gets lifted, any restrictions that get lifted, will put an upward pressure on the R number. They just mustn't put too much of an upward pressure on the R number.
And so you could see, different easing of the lockdown in different areas, depending on what the R number was doing in those areas?
Yes, if they know with any confidence what the R number is in different regions. And I'm not sure we do. I think we heard this morning that the R number in this country is between 0.6 and 0.9. And you've got to ask yourself, how useful is that range? Because if it's 0.9, then there is no headroom for lifting restrictions. If it's 0.6, then there is a little bit. So we really do need an accurate impression of what the R number is, and I don't think we really have that.
Okay, and Jackie Semple, what will you expect the Prime Minister to be saying?
I think that's the million-dollar question. I don't know if you listened to the First Minister in Scotland this afternoon. He was quite clear about the fact that she wants, rightly, everything to remain as is, with some relaxation around exercise. So I think that, we absolutely need to be clear here what any relaxation would look like and why. The far-reaching impact and consequences of going to this too early means that we will end up back at square one. So really important that from our profession's point of view, that we understand what the rationale is, what's likely to happen, and how we can take it forward. But I think the messaging has got to be crystal clear, and I think there's some confusion about that just now.
And do you fear he could be moving too quickly?
I think it's a very difficult balance because, as we've heard earlier today and through the speakers, it's a real challenge to try and get the right balance here. But I think what we've got to be aware of is that, we've been 7 weeks into lockdown. We also have to learn what or identify what we've learned so far, and then consider what are the options for us in going forward. But going early is not the best option, and relaxing is not the best option if it doesn't have the clear messaging aside it.
Right, and Edward Morgan, you presumably want to see Britain's business back to work as soon as possible.
Yes, but only if that can be done safely. And clearly some businesses have been operating during lockdown, not very many. It's true. Most of our members are in kind of a state of semi-hibernation. I think we're probably expecting to hear a little bit more encouragement for some firms to bring more people back to the workplace. But really, we do also want this to be done safely, so that the directors of the company are happy, it's safe, the staff, that the customers, everyone is comfortable, and we're not certainly calling for a reckless rush back to normal business.
Yeah, and Steve Turner, I mean, are your members prepared to go back? Are they ready to go back? Because I know some of your members, a number of your members have not only caught coronavirus, but some have passed away. Are they ready, the majority of your workers, to go back if necessary over the coming weeks?
Well, I think like other speakers have already said, our members will be looking for clear messaging this evening and a clear plan and a strategy, and I'm not quite sure that we're going to see that. I mean, millions of workers have continued to work through this, and we've had very mixed results as to whether they're working safely or not. So for our people and working people more generally, it'll be about whether or not we can safely return to work. And that's not just about the workplace, that's about getting to and from work, utilising public transport. It's about schools and childcare, and it's about whether or not there's demand for the product at the end of the day, or the service, as to whether or not employers are going to be comfortable and confident enough to reopen.
Yeah, and you say that you want a full health and safety agreement with the government and with employers before this happens, do you?
Well, we haven't seen guidance from government, which is quite strange. And in particular, we've not seen any mention of personal protective equipment in any guidance up until this point. So if he mentions it, certainly without any discussion with ourselves. But we do want to see risk assessments carried out. It's a statutory duty on all employers with 5 or more employees to conduct a risk assessment. We want to see that done. We want to identify the risks associated with COVID, and we want those employers to work with our very highly trained and competent health and safety reps to make sure there's confidence amongst the workforce themselves in that process, to make sure measures are in place and that people are genuinely safe in their return to work.
Yeah, and Edwin Morgan, are you prepared to enter into some sort of negotiations and subsequently an agreement about health and safety before a good number of workers go back to work?
I mean, I think we have to talk about what exactly that would involve. I mean, as Steve was saying, risk assessments are currently, widespread and standard anyway. Certainly, clearly, employers should be doing these before they start bringing people back to work. They should be talking to their employees about doing these as well. And it would be good practice to inform their employees what the policies that come off the back of it, how they're going to keep people safe, how they're going to change their workplaces. Absolutely.
And will you expect the government to spend more money on helping businesses adapt their businesses for the new working environment?
That would certainly be sensible. Things like PPE that was just mentioned, clearly that's going to be quite a considerable cost for small businesses in particular. There isn't an infinite supply of that as well. So clearly the government has to have a hand. I think the main thing is that restrictions aren't going to be lifted quickly. This is going to be a slow process. So as restrictions remain in place, government needs to keep its support in place and adapt it and make it more flexible as well as time goes on.
Yeah, Simon, how hard will it be for workplaces to adapt to social distancing? And also, is there a case for testing workers fairly regularly?
I think that's probably one of the things employers will have to do. Where I work, I have my own office. I'm much more than 2 meters away from most people on a day-by-day basis. But many workplaces are not like that. They're much more densely populated in terms of their workforce. They might come in contact with members of the public if they work in a shop, for instance. So, I mean, it's very varied, of course, but for certain employers, it's really going to be very difficult to manage this. But manage it, they'll have to. And like you say, I think testing and keeping an eye on their employees is going to be one of the ways in which they do that.
Yeah, and do you think masks will become the norm in workplaces in the foreseeable future?
Yes, I do. I think it's been widely trailed for a week or two now that they are probably going to be introduced or advised as a way of giving people reassurance. And I've said to you before that that's what they'll be good for. So I think that's where they will be people will be asked to wear them. But of course, not everyone will need to wear them all the time.
Yeah, okay. And Jackie Semple, just finally to you, which begs a question. On a planning issue, do we have enough masks? Will we have enough masks for the public to use them, as well as for carers and medical staff?
I think that's a huge challenge. We know over the last few weeks that we've had reports of the challenges with PPE because of the sheer scale. And if that's to be widened out and they have to be the right masks for people to wear, then absolutely that would need to be a consideration. But I think, you've heard everybody here on this panel wants everything to be done safely, properly, and at the right time. And I think that's the key issue here, is to make sure that all of that is in a strategy and a plan that can be taken forward in the right way.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Jackie. Thanks to all of you, and we'll be speaking to you again after the Prime Minister has spoken. So appreciate your comments now, and we'll speak to you a little later. Now, throughout the lockdown, we have been hearing from residents of one road in Leeds about how they have been coping. Caterina Vitozzi joins me now live from the street we're calling Lockdown Road. And Caterina, what do people there want to hear from the Prime Minister?
Well, there's been a variety of opinions there from the people that we've spoken to just in the last couple of hours that we've been here. But let's speak to Sadifa, who lives, as you say, on Lockdown Road. Sadifa, 7 p.m, an important announcement by Boris Johnson. What are the sort of things that you would like to hear? I know you're a mum, you've got a lot of kids inside. What are you hoping to hear?
To be honest, first of all, I'd just like for there to be some clarity. I think today a lot of people, we're still a bit on the edge about what is actually going to be said. I think we've been told that the advice has changed from stay at home to stay alert. In my opinion, that is still too ambiguous. We need a bit more clarity about what that means. In terms of being a mom, I've got 6 children at home, 5 of them I'm homeschooling. But to be honest, I would not send them back to school until I knew that schools were safe. It was safe for the teachers to continue. The teachers need PPE as well, but at the same time, how can they teach wearing face masks? And the task of social distancing children, that is impossible. How can you tell primary school children to, stay within 2 metres of each other? It's asking too much.
Right, so Sadifa, they're looking for a little bit of clarity, she hopes, in the remarks at 7 p.m. Let's go and speak now to one of her neighbours, Vajid. Hi there. What are you hoping to hear from Boris Johnson at 7 p.m?
Well, I'm just going to amplify what I said on Thursday, and I want to hear that the lockdown should be extended. And, it's just through the statistics. I mean, the statistics do speak for themselves. I mean, if you just look at it, the NHS is still, not getting sufficient PPE. UK is still one of the highest death rates in the whole of Europe, and the government are still failing to test 100,000 people per day. And also I read an article that the scientists have advised the government if the lockdown gets eased off, there could be possible additional 50,000 deaths at the end of the year. And we need to question, can we really risk it? And what we really should be doing is basically looking at other countries, see what their success and failures are. And China, there's no sign of a coronavirus at the moment. Reason being, they had a strict lockdown for 3 months, you see. And I know it's going to...
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but so it sounds like, in your opinion, really, you want to see the lockdown continuing as it is. That is what you'd hope to hear.
But what I would like to add, though, is that even if it doesn't go to if it doesn't ease the lockdown, we will support our government, and we just have to have faith and see how it goes.
Right, well, a lot of people on this road, as they will be across the country and the UK, listening very carefully to the words by the Prime Minister at 7 p.m.
Yeah, OK, Caterina, thank you very much. Coming up on Sky News, live from Downing Street, we will bring you that statement from the Prime Minister. Welcome back, and this is the scene across London as we await the Prime Minister, who is going to speak to the country about easing the lockdown and a timetable for easing this lockdown. That in about 8 or 9 minutes' time now. Before that, I'm going to speak to our science correspondent, Thomas Moore, and economics editor, Ed Conway. And Thomas, first of all, to you, I mean, the phrase of the Times is follow the science. What will the scientists be saying to Boris Johnson now about the situation with this virus?
They will say, watch those numbers really carefully. Those daily statistics that we get on the number of new cases, how many cases are out there, the R number that you hear the Prime Minister and other ministers talking about so much, that's what will determine the speed at which we can lift these restrictions. At the moment, there are probably around 200,000 people with the coronavirus out there. That could seed a new outbreak if they don't very carefully stop that virus spreading. Now, at the moment, for every 10 people who have the infection, they're passing it on to between 5 and 9 other people. So it is slowly coming down. But as there's more contact between people, the virus could quickly pick up speed, and that's what will determine how quickly it can allow people to move around the country and start seeing all those generations of families going back to work, and perhaps even going at some point back to school and back to the pub.
Yeah, and it's that second wave, that second spike that no one wants. Ed Conway, I mean, the predictions for the economy over the past week or so have been absolutely dire, so the pressure is on to get people back to work.
The pressure's definitely on, and it's that balancing act that we've had throughout. You know, the government obviously and rightly says that saving lives comes first, but it's very aware that the impact on the economy is extreme. And you heard the Chancellor just the other week saying that the amount that they're having to spend on the furlough scheme, so keeping people, keeping them in some sort of kind of living standards, keeping the government paying their wages, you know, that is costing getting towards the monthly budget of the NHS. So there is a big kind of awareness that both in terms of what the government is spending and in terms of the impact of the economy, lockdown has been very severe indeed, more severe actually than the government might have expected. So I think the thing to watch out for is going to be to seeing how the Prime Minister balances out those two things. On the one hand, health, obviously all important, but does he encourage some sectors of the economy to get back to work? You might argue that there are some parts of the economy, for instance, construction, you know, they were never thinking that the entire construction sector was going to shut down effectively, but it basically has. You know, when you look at the figures of activity in construction sector, it's ground to a halt, even though a lot of people in the government thought they should continue working. The lockdown has been rather more successful in some ways, economically speaking, than many in the government had anticipated. So that balancing act of trying to encourage some people to get back to work while doing it safely is going to be one which I think the Prime Minister is going to be very much focused on, and also aware that the longer the lockdown goes on for, the more the cost both for the Exchequer and for the broader economy.
Okay, Ed, thank you very much indeed. And with me now is our political editor, Beth Rigby. And so, Beth, what does it look like? The lockdown continues, but with small modifications.
Yes, look, the Prime Minister tonight will give the public a roadmap as to how we get out of this lockdown. But he will also say that it has to be a gradual process. And why? Because as Thomas was talking about, the R rate, there's still too many cases in the country, and there's still too many daily cases. One senior government figure I spoke to a little while ago said there's about 16,000 new cases a day. The government need to get that down to about 4,000 cases a day in order to meaningfully lift the lockdown, and that is going to take a bit more time. So what are we going to expect? Well, I think tonight that we'll get some indication of some very gentle easing of the lockdown. It might be that we're allowed to sunbathe and go out and exercise more, some of the things that Nicola Sturgeon actually was talking about. And then the government will outline future phases and markers on this route map back to some sort of new normal, but it will be very conditional on the transmission rate of this disease. It's not a linear path. The government might have to tighten measures again, depending on whether that R rate and the transmission of coronavirus spikes up. So it will be baby steps, and the watchword will really be caution.
All right, and the slogans, stay home, very clear to people and very successful. Stay home, protect the NHS. Almost too successful, some Tory MPs are saying. The new one, less clear. What's been the political reaction to that?
Well, Nicola Sturgeon said that she doesn't like this new slogan, but from a government perspective, and some of the senior ministers I've spoken to, what they're trying to do is encourage people to still be vigilant, to keep their distance, but they need to get some people back to work. When they said stay at home, they didn't mean for everyone to never go out or back to work again. And so you take construction workers or manufacturing, there's sectors that they would like to try and get back to work. They know that they need to try and get this economy very, very gently moving again, because as Ed was talking, the costs of those schemes. So it's a more nuanced message, because they want more nuanced behaviour from individuals depending on their particular circumstances. For example, when key workers were allowed to send their kids to school if they wanted to come to work, the government thought maybe 20% of children might still go to school. Immediately after the lockdown, it was down to less than 1%. It slightly picked up, but basically people put their families at home, they stayed at home even if they had to go to work, and they need to slowly try and encourage people just to venture out a bit more, which is why the messaging is changing. And the problem with all of this is it does get more complicated as you try and reopen the economy and reopen society, because we don't know what impact that will have on the virus. It's unknown, and it will be by definition complicated, and there might be some false starts.
And can you see now some divergence or a growing divergence between what different parts of the UK does?
Yeah, look, there are some issues, clearly some issues around what the Welsh government is saying and what the Scottish government is saying against the UK government. There's mixed messaging. That's not particularly helpful. And then, of course, when the government talks about wanting people to go back to work, they haven't signed off guidelines with the unions. They haven't signed off guidelines with the teaching unions about whether or not they eventually send more children back into school. So there are things that are really unclear tonight and today. What we're going to get from the Prime Minister is a broad brush approach, a statement tonight, but the real detail will come tomorrow when the government actually publish a detailed document and the PM goes to Parliament to speak to MPs.
All right, our political editor Beth Rigby there, and we'll speak to you right after the Prime Minister has spoken. So it is almost 7 weeks since Boris Johnson put Britain into lockdown. In that 7 weeks, the death toll across the UK has risen above 30,000, and the economy has effectively ground to a halt. So how do we start to get out of it? Let's listen now to the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson.
It is now almost 2 months since the people of this country began to put up with restrictions on their freedom, your freedom, of a kind that we have never seen before in peace or war. And you have shown the good sense to support those rules overwhelmingly. You've put up with all the hardships of that programme of social distancing because you understand that as things stand, and as the experience of every other country has shown, it's the only way to defeat the coronavirus, the most vicious threat this country has faced in my lifetime. And though the death toll has been tragic and the suffering immense, and though we grieve for all those we have lost, it is a fact that by adopting those measures we prevented this country from being engulfed by what could have been a catastrophe in which the reasonable worst-case scenario was 500,000 fatalities. And it's thanks to your effort and sacrifice in stopping the spread of this disease that the death rate is coming down and hospital admissions are coming down. And thanks to you, we've protected our NHS and saved many thousands of lives. And so I know, you know, that it would be madness now to throw away that achievement by allowing a second spike. We must stay alert. We must continue to control the virus and save lives. And yet we must also recognise that this campaign against the virus has come at colossal cost to our way of life. We can see it all around us in the shuttered shops and abandoned businesses and darkened pubs and restaurants. And there are millions of people who are both fearful of this terrible disease and at the same time also fearful of what this long period of enforced inactivity will do to their livelihoods and their mental and physical well-being, to their futures and the futures of their children. So I want to provide tonight for you the shape of a plan to address both fears, both to beat the virus and provide the first sketch of a roadmap for reopening society, a sense of the way ahead, and when and how and on what basis we will take the decisions to proceed. I'll be setting out more details in Parliament tomorrow and taking questions from the public in the evening. I've consulted across the political spectrum, across all 4 nations of the UK. And though different parts of the country are experiencing the pandemic at different rates, and though it's right to be flexible in our response, I believe that as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Scotland, England, Wales, Northern Ireland, there is a strong resolve to defeat this together. And today, a general consensus on what we could do. And I stress could, because although we have a plan, it is a conditional plan. And since our priority is to protect the public and save lives, we cannot move forward unless we satisfy the 5 tests. We must protect our NHS. We must see sustained falls in the death rate. We must see sustained and considerable falls in the rate of infection. We must sort out our challenges in getting enough PPE to the people who need it. And yes, it's a global problem, but we must fix it. And last, we must make sure that any measures we take do not force the reproduction rate of the disease, the R, back up over 1, so that we have the kind of exponential growth we were facing a few weeks ago. And to chart our progress and to avoid going back to square 1, we're establishing a new COVID alert system run by a new joint biosecurity centre. And that COVID alert level will be determined primarily by R and the number of coronavirus cases, and in turn, that COVID alert level will tell us how tough we have to be in our social distancing measures. The lower the level, the fewer the measures, the higher the level, the tougher and stricter we will have to be. There will be 5 alert levels. Level 1 means the disease is no longer present in the UK, and level 5 is the most critical, the kind of situation we could have had if the NHS had been overwhelmed. Over the period of the lockdown, we've been in level 4, and it's thanks to your sacrifice we're now in a position to begin to move in steps to level 3. And as we go, everyone will have a role to play in keeping the R down by staying alert and following the rules. And to keep pushing the number of infections down, there are 2 more things we must do. We must reverse rapidly the awful epidemics in care homes and in the NHS. And though the numbers are coming down sharply now, there is plainly much more to be done. And if we're to control this virus, then we must have a world-beating system for testing potential victims and for tracing their contacts, so that, all told, we're testing literally hundreds of thousands of people every day. We've made fast progress on testing, but there is so much more to do now, and we can. When this began, we hadn't seen this disease before, and we didn't fully understand its effects. With every day, we're getting more and more data. We're shining the light of science on this invisible killer, and we will pick it up where it strikes, because our new system will be able in time to detect local flare-ups in your area, as well as giving us a national picture. And yet, when I look at where we are tonight, we have the R below 1, between 0.5 and 0.9, but potentially only just below 1. And though we have made progress in satisfying at least some of the conditions I have given, we have by no means fulfilled all of them. And so, no, this is not the time simply to end the lockdown this week. Instead, we're taking the first careful steps to modify our measures. And the first step is a change of emphasis that we hope that people will act on this week. We said that you should work from home if you can, and only go to work if you must. We now need to stress that anyone who can't work from home, for instance, those in construction or manufacturing, should be actively encouraged to go to work, and we want it to be safe for you to get to work. So you should avoid public transport if at all possible, because we must and will maintain social distancing, and capacity will therefore be limited. So, work from home if you can, but you should go to work if you can't work from home. And to ensure you are safe at work, we've been working to establish new guidance for employers to make workplaces COVID secure. And when you do go to work, if possible, do so by car, or even better, by walking or bicycle. But just as with workplaces, public transport operators will also be following COVID secure standards. And from this Wednesday, we want to encourage people to take more and even unlimited amounts of outdoor exercise. You can sit in the sun in your local park, you can drive to other destinations, you can even play sports, only with members of your own household. You must obey the rules on social distancing, and to enforce those rules, we will increase the fines for the small minority who break them. And so, every day, with ever-increasing data, we will be monitoring the R and the number of new infections and the progress we are making. And if we as a nation begin to fulfill the conditions I have set out, then in the next few weeks and months, we may be able to go further. In step 2, at the earliest by June the 1st, after half-term, we believe we may be in a position to begin the phased reopening of shops and to get primary pupils back into schools, in stages, beginning with reception, year 1 and year 6. Our ambition is that secondary pupils facing exams next year will get at least some time with their teachers before the holidays, and we'll shortly be setting out detailed guidance on how to make it work in schools and shops and on transport. And step 3, at the earliest by July, and subject to all these conditions and further scientific advice, if and only if the numbers support it, we will hope to reopen at least some of the hospitality industry and other public places, provided they're safe and enforce social distancing. Throughout this period of the next 2 months, we will be driven not by mere hope or economic necessity. We're going to be driven by the science, the data, and public health. And I must stress again that all of this is conditional. It all depends on a series of big ifs. It depends on all of us, the entire country, to follow the advice, to observe social distancing, and to keep that R down. And to prevent reinfection from abroad, I'm serving notice that it will soon be the time, with transmission significantly lower, to impose quarantine on people coming into this country by air. And it's because of your efforts to get the R down and the number of infections down here that this measure will now be effective. And of course, we will be monitoring our progress locally, regionally, and nationally. And if there are outbreaks, if there are problems, we will not hesitate to put on the brakes. We've been through the initial peak, but it's coming down the mountain that is often more dangerous. We have a route and we have a plan. And everyone in government has the all-consuming pressure and challenge to save lives, restore livelihoods, and gradually restore the freedoms that we need. But in the end, this is a plan that everyone must make work. And when I look at what you've done already, the patience and common sense you've shown, the fortitude of the elderly, whose isolation we all want to end as fast as we can, the incredible bravery and hard work of our NHS staff, our care workers, the devotion and self-sacrifice of all those in every walk of life who are helping us to beat this disease: police, bus drivers, train drivers, pharmacists, supermarket workers, road hauliers, bin collectors, cleaners, security guards, postal workers, our teachers, and 1,000 more. The scientists who are working round the clock to find a vaccine. When I think of the millions of everyday acts of kindness and thoughtfulness that are being performed across this country and that have helped to get us through this first phase, I know that we can use this plan to get us through the next. And if we can't do it by those dates, and if the alert level won't allow it, we will simply wait and go on until we've got it right. We will come back from this devilish illness. We will come back to health and robust health. And though the UK will be changed by this experience, I believe we can be stronger and better than ever before, more resilient, more innovative, more economically dynamic, but also more generous and more sharing. But for now, we must stay alert, control the virus, and save lives. Thank you very much.
So there we are, the Prime Minister setting out a conditional plan, very conditional plan, 3 steps for the next phase of this crisis. And apart from, well, really small modifications, there's no immediate end in sight to the lockdown. More exercise will be allowed. You can sit in the park, play sports with your family. He said he actively encouraged those who cannot work from home to, from tomorrow, return to work. And he said public transport should be avoided if at all possible. Well, our political editor, Beth Rigby, is here and was listening. Beth, so let's just go through it, more carefully. What do you make of what he said?
Well, the first thing to say is how conditional it all is. And the message, I think, from the Prime Minister was, I want to try and ease us out of this lockdown, but it is actually dependent on also how everyone behaves. And the guiding light of all of it for them will, of course, be that transmission rate. And he said that the R must not go over 1. They've put in place this new 5-point alert system. So when they were worried about the NHS being overwhelmed, that was number 5. He now thinks we're moving towards number 3, but of course there's so much nervousness about a second peak, which is why the measures in terms of what we might see in terms of the next phase are so modest. And just in terms of what it means for all of us, because I think that was the most important thing from that statement, you've got 3 steps there that the Prime Minister's outlined. The first step is that from Wednesday, people will be allowed to go outside, will be able to take unlimited amounts of exercise. That could be playing a round of golf, it could be swimming in an outdoor pond, it could be angling, going fishing. So all sorts of sports, playing a game of tennis, will be allowed to do that. He said that you can sit in the local park, you can go to the beach and sunbathe, you can drive to other destinations and you can play sports, but you have to do it with members of your household. And if you want to meet up with anyone else, they would want that to be limited and it would have to be socially distanced. And then phase 2 will be whether or not we can get the children back to school, and that will be from June the first at the earliest. And again, I stress it depends on the transmission rate of the disease. The Prime Minister talked about a phased reopening of primary schools. Year 1 and Year 6 would go back first. If your child's in childcare, nurseries, they would hope could be back as early as June the 1st. And they also want a phased reopening of non-essential shops. As for secondary school kids, years 10 and 12, those facing exams might get some face time with their teacher, but the message to parents with secondary school children of other ages is that they will not be going back to school before summer. So it's really primary school kids, and if they can, they would like to get more year groups back before the end of term. And then this third phase is by the earliest of July, and this is subject, again, the Prime Minister very clear about the scientific advice. The government wants to reopen at least some of the hospitality industry and other public places, because obviously tourist spots in the UK are very, very worried about the tourist season. But again, that is all contingent on the R rate, and they have, as I said, put in this system to try and monitor that.
And on work and going back to work, I'm not quite clear what's changed. He said, used the phrase, actively encourage those who cannot work from home to go back to their place of work. Has that advice changed?
Well, it's quite nuanced, isn't it? I think that there is, from the sources I've talked to in government, they were a bit surprised at the fact that everyone stopped going to work, that everyone chose to stay at home. And the clear message there was, we want to get the manufacturing industry up and going. We want construction workers to go back to work. Basically, the government needs some more economic activity. Everyone cannot stay at home indefinitely on the furlough scheme. They need to try and encourage people back to work. But there are issues around this. There's issues around workplace safety. The unions are not happy that they haven't agreed safety guidelines with the government. So I don't think it's as clear cut, but I think what you can see there is that there's a nod towards the need to try and get the economy moving again, because, you know, as people have been discussing more openly in the past few days, there is a health cost to keeping the economy closed in terms of long-term health problems that don't get dealt with, but also the issue of people's mental health, and also the fallout of many jobs just not being there when we try and reopen the economy again, and what that means for people and their livelihoods.
Yeah, these are all very fine and very difficult judgments. Beth, for now, thank you very much indeed. And let's just have a look now at some of the new measures announced there by the Prime Minister this evening. And from tomorrow, people in England are told to go to work, if it's possible, from home, but they should avoid public transport if possible. From Wednesday, you can sit in your local park. From Wednesday also, you can do unlimited outdoor exercise. That will be allowed. People should stay 2 meters away from others whenever possible. There will also be an increase in fines for those who ignore the rules. By the earliest, June the 1st, there could be a phased reopening of some shops and primary schools. And by July, at the earliest, there could, as Beth was saying, be the reopening of some of the hospitality industry. Those are the plans, conditional plans, set out by Boris Johnson in the last few minutes. Let's just rejoin the panel for a quick word from each of them about what they make of it all. And Simon Clark, microbiologist at University of Reading, Steve Turner from the Unite Union, Edwin Morgan from the Institute of Directors, and Jackie Semple, who is chair of the Emergency Planning Society. Simon, let's just start with you. And from a scientist's point of view, are you surprised at what he said, or do you think he couldn't have gone much further?
I don't think he could have gone any further. This is pretty much exactly what I was expecting. We really are feeling our way in the dark with this. All countries are. And it'd be very interesting to learn from other countries what they think are the restrictions that they lift that put the most upward pressure on their R numbers, so that perhaps we can avoid those coming all at once or spread those out a bit further. But I don't think he could really have done any more.
OK, and Jackie Semple, is this pretty much what you were expecting?
No, I think he's got a really difficult job. You are, as Prime Minister of, as he's rightly said, over the United Kingdom, but with the fact that we've got some devolved administrations as well. So I do think that, he is trying to give a measured approach to share information that potentially is giving some reassurance to people around what potentially we could perhaps go to. So there's a bit of stabilisation there around what he's thinking may help. I think the challenge with it is how we actually apply it. And I think to sort of come out and say, well, by tomorrow you can do this, by Wednesday potentially that, it's the bit around all of that. It's the impact and the potential consequences that we've got to look at and make sure that everybody can really, the social distancing is the thing to make sure that they can comply with that. So, I absolutely understand that, he's trying to give reassurance to all of us as citizens, but at the same time, we just need to be measured in what we're saying and what we're doing, and actually how we can achieve that in the best way, and everybody actually still listen.
Yeah, OK. And Edward Morgan, he talked about actively encouraging people to go back to work. What will business make of what you heard this evening?
Well, so this would probably be most relevant to companies who have been operating over the last few weeks. From our surveys, most of our members would take about 3 to 4 weeks to get up and running fully again from where we are now. So it's positive in that it's trying to send a positive message. If you can operate safely, if you can be at work safely, then and you work in one of those industries where you have to be, then you should go back. So that's good. But I think obviously clearly we still need to see the guidance that's expected around how more workplaces can reopen safely.
Yeah, and Steve Turner, I assume for you, it is just this very big question of whether it's safe for your workers to go back to work.
Yeah, look, we understand the economic impact of this lockdown, both on our people, of course, our members, our families, and indeed the business. But to say that you can't mingle in the park, but it's safe to go back to work and maybe work within 2 meters of one another, it is ridiculous. He mentions the guidance that's being issued, but we haven't even seen the guidance. He mentions safe systems of work and risk assessment, but our offer to put 100,000 health and safety reps at their disposal to help introduce the safe systems of work that are necessary here seems to have fallen on deaf ears. So I'm very sceptical about moving from the soundbite to the very practical, detailed plan that's needed by employers in order to return people to work and to return them safely with confidence.
OK, Steve Turner, thanks very much indeed, and thanks to Simon Clarke, Jackie Semple and to Edwin Morgan. Let's just join our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. So small modifications in the end, Sam. Do you get the sense that Boris Johnson couldn't go as far as he instinctively wanted to go?
No, I think that the most important thing about today's speech actually wasn't the changes that he announced that are, as you say, very small. And I think instinctively in the cabinet battle that's going on between the Hawks and the Doves, Boris Johnson at the moment seems to be somebody who is at the more cautious end of things. I actually think the principal point of this speech was the first 2/3 where he was addressing the nation in his role of Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, because he wanted to show that he understands the pain that the nation's going through, both in terms of the suffering and costs of coronavirus directly, and the hurt that people are feeling as a result of the lockdown. Most of all, I think, by doing this as an address to the nation rather than a press conference where there's back and forth and he's on the back foot and having to sort of deal with difficult issues, he wanted to say, I feel your pain, I get it, it, there will be a better future because the present is so painful. And I don't think we can dismiss that. I think that actually, given that the concrete measures were so small, that was clearly the intention of Downing Street tonight. So what of the future? And I think you're right. I don't think that we have particularly changed the dial. The most important thing isn't the policy tweaks, but the headline message, that move from stay at home to stay alert, that move to encourage people to go back to work who can't work at home, something that was still part of the guidance, but not quite as aggressively signalled. I think those are the messages they want people to hear.
OK, Sam, thank you very much indeed. Stay with us. And of course, reaction to the Prime Minister's statement is likely to dominate tomorrow's papers. We'll be taking a first look at those front pages in our press preview on Sky News tonight at 10:30 with City AM's comment editor Rachel Cunliffe and the columnist for Unheard, Paul Embury. We'll have much more on the Prime Minister's statement right after this break. Yes, welcome back to Downing Street, where the Prime Minister has tonight delivered his new message for the pandemic, telling the nation to stay alert, control the virus and save lives. Boris Johnson also stressed the importance of defeating COVID-19 together, but at odds with leaders in Wales and Scotland. He said people should go to work if they cannot work at home. We're going to talk to Ian Blackford of the SNP in just a moment, but let's get a quick word with our science correspondent Thomas Moore and economics editor Ed Conway. Thomas, first of all, what did you make of what the Prime Minister said?
Well, he was right to say that it's much more dangerous coming back down the mountain. It's easy to become overconfident and make mistakes. Just look at what's happened in Germany, the country that has done so much right in this epidemic, where they've been so far ahead of the rest of Europe on testing and controlling the spread. And yet, since it has begun to ease the lockdown there, it has seen a big rise in the R number. It is now over that threshold of 1. The outbreak is beginning to spread once again, and they're extremely nervous. Now, if they can't get it right, then it just underlines how perilous this is going to be for the British government as they begin to get the country back to work. Because as people start to move around, as they have those social contacts once again, that virus could pick up. And we have a lot of the virus in the UK, somewhere around 200,000 cases at the moment. So if the R does go back above 1, that could lead to a second spike extremely quickly.
Yeah, and Ed Conway, it was a speech that showed how difficult it's going to be to balance the whole issue of the spread of the virus and economic recovery, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think you picked up in it just after the speech with your in your conversation with Beth. You know, the actual changes that there are to the lockdown rules in terms of the economic side of it. So businesses which are technically allowed or not allowed to go back to work. You know, that hasn't really changed. There was for me the line that jumped out was when he was talking about manufacturing construction workers should be actively encouraged to go back to work. Well, you know, there's been lots of talk, Mark, about lockdown and people flouting lockdown. Well, in a sense, businesses flouted it for a long time, but flouted it in the opposite direction. They've gone a lot further than the lockdown rules had implied. So actually, a lot of businesses had basically shut down operations or moved their operations to working from home long before the government imposed those rules. Many construction firms in particular, a lot of people thought, you know, in government, they thought that there would be large parts of the economy that would just carry on as normal, including construction and manufacturing. Well, in fact, if you look at the economic data, manufacturing and construction have basically collapsed in terms of economic activity to levels that we have never seen before. So what you're seeing from the Prime Minister is not actually a change in the rules when he's talking about encouraging workers to go back to work. He wants them to obey the rules as the government originally imposed them. He would rather that businesses didn't go much further than had been agreed by the government. But what you can already see, and just looking at some of the reaction that we've had from business groups, is they are still very wary. They're still very wary about protecting their employees. They're wary about social distancing, and they're wary about bringing employees back to work. And for some of them, perhaps that's no surprise, given that they can claim money from the government through the furlough scheme. So this is still a difficult balancing act, and the government is desperate to try to get the economy going more or less in tune with what it had originally intended. The reality is the lockdown has been rather more successful, in inverted commas, than it had expected when it comes to the economy, when it comes to shutting down the economy. And all those predictions about collapses in economic growth, well, they look like they will indeed come to pass. The question is whether those lockdown measures imposed by companies rather than the governments go on even longer than the government would like.
Yeah, a difficult balancing act, it certainly is. Ed, thank you very much indeed. And Thomas Moore, our science editor, thanks very much. Let's now, we can go to Portree in Skye and speak to Ian Blackford, the SNP Westminster leader and MP for Ross, Skye and Lochaber. I hope I pronounced that right. Good to see you this evening. First of all, tell us what you thought of the Prime Minister's speech.
Well, I think there is some genuine concern in Scotland, but indeed not just in Scotland, in Wales and Northern Ireland. We hoped that what we would have would be a four-nation consensus. And in effect, what we see tonight is the Prime Minister has broken that consensus. There's a divergence in the messages that are being delivered. And I and my party and my government in Edinburgh regret that, because our message is a very simple one. It's a clear one. And that is that people should be staying at home to protect the NHS and to save lives. And I think what we've got tonight is confusion, has just been shown by your own reporters there. Businesses are going to be concerned. At the end of the day, Mark, the absolute priority for all of us should be about saving lives. We haven't got the R number down to a level that would indicate to us that we should be allowing more people to go back to work at this stage. And indeed in Scotland, the guidance that we have given to the construction industry, unless they were working on hospital projects, for example, is that construction activity shouldn't be taking place. And the same goes for manufacturing, if it was only for the food industry, essential industries that should be at work. So we do have a situation tonight that the devolved administrations are in a very different place from the government in London.
Yeah, I mean, but do you not accept that people should now be actively encouraged to go back to work if it is possible, and that it is a more nuanced message now than simply stay home?
No, I don't agree with that, Mark, because we've talked, the Prime Minister talked about that timeline of schools in England going back on the 1st of June. That certainly wouldn't be happening in Scotland. About shops opening up again, non-essential shops, and indeed hospitality opening up at the beginning of July. I have to say that fills me with horror, because what we need to do is to make sure that we keep the pressure on to get the R rate down. Living in the Isle of Skye, as I do, we've had a significant outbreak at a care home over the course of the last few days. Now is not the time for us to be putting in place a reversal of lockdown. It is far too early for that. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of the population, certainly here, the vast majority of the population, are very concerned about being encouraged to go back to work before it's too early. And certainly when I live in a place like this, which is a tourist-based economy, we of course want to welcome people to the Highlands of Scotland, but my message is not yet. People must stay away until it's safe to do so. And we have to keep on the path that we're on. We are making progress. We are seeing a reduction in the those that are going into hospital, and I'm glad to say the death rate. But we must keep the pressure on. And there's a very real concern that people will get the message from what the Prime Minister said tonight, that it's back to business as usual. And that poses real questions for the growth of this virus.
Well, to be fair, he hardly said back to business as usual. It was a very cautious plan and a 3-step plan, so it's clearly not back to business as usual. Do you see now different parts of the UK moving inevitably at different speeds on this?
That's exactly what happened, because in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, the First Ministers have made it clear that the current arrangements for lockdown should remain in place. And the reason that they're doing that is because of the responsibilities that they feel from how the advice that they take from their scientific advisors and what we should be doing. But the important point is that the Prime Minister has given the green light to those that want to return back to work in manufacturing and the business community. It's a very different message that the Prime Minister is delivering tonight, and it's one I regret that he has given a different message from the one that the governments in the other nations in the United Kingdom are giving.
Yeah, and just finally and briefly, if you would, do you accept now you've lost the argument over extending the transition period and the Prime Minister is simply not going to delay that?
No, not at all. I'm glad that a number of other opposition parties at Westminster have joined with us. We are in a health crisis which has triggered an economic crisis. We all must put in place measures to get the economy back on the right footing as early as we can do so. And the last thing we need is the uncertainty of a no deal or a bad deal Brexit at the end of the transition period in December. All our efforts should be in dealing with this crisis, and then we can have the discussions about what our future will be with the European Union. But we should be parking that for now, and I believe that is a proposition that has significant support around the country.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening, and I think we can go straight to the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, who joins us now, I believe, and there he is. Thanks very much for joining us. First of all, your reaction to what the Prime Minister had to say. Good evening.
Well, I think what the country wanted tonight was real clarity and a sense of consensus, and I'm afraid we haven't got that. The basic message, stay alert, just isn't clear enough, and there are more questions than answers in the Prime Minister's statement. And we now have the prospect of England, Scotland and Wales with different messages and pulling in different directions. So that clarity isn't there and the consensus isn't there. Now, I appreciate there will be more detail tomorrow and there'll be further questions to be asked, but at the moment there's a gap between what we really needed tonight and what we got.
But a couple of weeks ago you asked for a timetable to be laid out. Now you have that timetable, conditional though it is.
No, I accept that. We did ask for it. And I said at the time it will be conditional. I don't criticise that. I well understand that the dates are provisional. But some of the detail in what's been said tonight causes real concern. So millions of people are being told, particularly in construction and manufacturing, effectively go back to work tomorrow. That's in about 12 hours' time. But they're being told at the same time to go back to work, if possible, not using public transport. That's a real logistical problem for tomorrow morning for millions of people. Equally, there were guidelines on what safety at work needs to look like. They were very vague, with gaps in last weekend, and we haven't seen any new guidelines. So lots of businesses, trade unions and employees are going to be saying, am I going back to a safe working environment? So I don't criticise the conditionality and the fact that further down the line conditions will have to be fulfilled. But tomorrow morning poses a real problem, I think, for millions of people who are being told, as I say, go back to work, but don't use public transport. And I think lots of people will be scratching their heads tonight to say, well, how's that actually going to work?
So would you be going along with Nicola Sturgeon, and would you still have the slogan, stay home, protect the NHS, save lives?
Well, I would, that basic message has to be really easy to understand. And I'm afraid stay alert just isn't easy to understand. You've seen the reaction to it today. But it's not just the slogan, it's also some of the underlying details about what's going to happen in the next few days. And as I say, tomorrow is going to be a very, very difficult day for millions of people as they presumably try to go back to work without using public transport and not being assured that what they're going to is a safe place of work. And I don't think anybody wants that. I don't think businesses want that, and I don't think employees want that. And that's why I would have hoped there was more of a consensus built, so that by the time we got to this stage, broadly everybody would say, well, we know what we're doing now, we've got an agreed plan, we've just got to operate it. I think for a lot of people, as I say, they're going to be scratching their heads saying, how on earth is it actually going to work tomorrow morning?
And just on the broader picture, you said in the Commons the other day that the government had been slow on the lockdown, slow on PPE, slow on testing. Do you accept Labour were slow to start pushing the government on all these things as well?
No, we pushed the government on lockdown, we pushed them on testing, and we pushed them on PPE. Now, we pushed and challenged with a purpose, which was to try to get them to speed up. And I've said that under my leadership, we're not out to score party political points. So it was to get them to speed up and to ramp up. We did want this plan unveiled. What I really wanted, and I pushed them on this last week, was I said, build a consensus around the plan before you deliver the plan as being delivered this evening, because I think the public are very scared and anxious about what comes next. They want reassurance. And if they can see political parties, employers, England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, all broadly on the same page, that helps with reassurance and confidence. But I'm afraid we've arrived tonight without that. Now, that's a duty then on all of us to see whether we can provide that going forward. But that basic consensus that I was arguing for, I don't think is there tonight.
Yeah, the reason I said slow on pushing them on all this, to be fair, because Prime Minister's questions on March the 11th, when you could have been calling for a lockdown, Jeremy Corbyn asked one question on coronavirus, about sick pay. The rest was about life expectancy and gender pay gap, important issues, but not coronavirus, and not pushing them on a lockdown when other countries were doing that.
Well, the Labour Party was clearly calling for a lockdown before the government put it in place, and I was making that case, and we were certainly making the case on testing and on protective equipment. And I've tried in the 5 weeks I've been Labour leader to be constructive by setting out what it is we're calling for, and saying that where the government does get it right, we'll support them, which is why we openly supported them on lockdown and on the continuation of lockdown. I was very quick to come out and say the government's right about this and we support them, but we challenge them where we think they're going too slowly, and they were slow into lockdown, slow on testing, slow on protective equipment, and I'm afraid it's looking like we're slow on tracing. Now, the purpose of that challenge is to get things fixed, to make sure that we can move forward more quickly, because in the end, I think in a crisis like this, what people want to see is, if there's a problem, identify it, challenge it, get it fixed, so that we can all be better reassured about what's going to happen next.
OK, Sir Keir Starmer, thanks for joining us this evening. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Now, the Prime Minister referred to the R, or reproduction rate, again in